Chapter 1. The Foundling Beneath the Stars. Listen, my young one, and let the night receive you. Let your breath grow slow, like the dimming of a distant sun, and let your thoughts gather as starlight gathers on the rim of the galaxy, drifting, circling, soft. In these quiet hours, we travel to a world whose true name has been scattered to dust and ash. A village whose low walls and wind-worn stones remember every step, every whispered prayer, and every promise that a frightened child once made to the sky. He was called Din Djarin, though he did not know that name at first. Names come slowly to the Mandalorian foundling, like dawn seeping through shutters, like courage finding a small and trembling heart. And yet, they come. The village was simple, a ring of clay and timber enclosed by fields that sighed in the evening breeze. Earthen ovens cooled to a gentle glow. Water jars lined the courtyards like dull, patient moons. The mothers ground grain and hummed in tones that imitated the wind. The fathers sealed tools with pitch, and with the care of ritual, set aside the day's labor for the peace of night. Above everything hung the sky, unblinking, very old, holding its patient counsel. Children learned the paths of constellations the way they learned the paths between doorways. And among them was a boy with careful eyes, watchful as a perched nightbird, who noticed how shadows lengthened and how silence could speak. On that day, ah yes, that day which came like a fever, a far-off tremor reached them first, a sound that made the jars murmur against one another. The elders opened the gate to gaze across the field, and the steady breeze became a tight thread pulled through the throat of the world. Fire ripened on the horizon. Iron shapes slid out from the glare with a slow, terrible grace, and then the sky fractured into gleaming fragments. The village scattered. Not in panic, no, but with the practiced urgency of people who knew that troubled times sometimes wandered in with the dusk, uninvited, and sat down among them. You will not dwell on the sharpness of that hour. You are safe here. Breathe in and out, because our purpose is gentler than the memory of sparks and smoke. We will say only that there was a cellar, and a mother's arms, and the smell of clay floor made damp by the water jar she had overturned, to make a small river that might drown out a soldier's footsteps. We will say that the boy listened to the storm above him, listened with clenched teeth, until listening was all he could do. And then the trapdoor opened with a creak that sounded like a question. And the sky answered. Armored figures stood beyond the edge of the cellar's mouth. Their helmets were like moonless midnight, their faces unreadable. And yet, in the way they moved, there was a promise. Not a loud promise. Not one dressed in banners or trumpets, but a quiet vow of iron intention. This child will not be lost. One of them knelt, Beskar plates whispering against each other, offered a hand that was steady as stone, and lifted the boy into a world soothed by a different order. The boy would later remember the color of the warrior's pauldron, the tilt of the helmet, the low hum of the jetpack warming like a hearth. He would remember the curve of a visor where he sought his own reflection and, finding none, found calm instead. He would not remember how long it took to leave the village behind. Only that, as they rose, he saw the fields become a tapestry of dark threads, and the oven's last embers blink like sleepy eyes, and the sky, always the sky, hold him as gently as a cradle. So he became a foundling. In the company of the concealed, he learned to walk softly, to speak sparingly, to eat what was given, and to give what was asked. He learned that shelter had a sound. It was the quiet ring of metal in the hands of those who believed. He learned that sorrow could be tempered, hammered and quenched, shaped into something that did not break. At night, in a cavern that smelled of forged smoke and cool stone, he listened to the older ones speak, with voices smoothed by discipline. They did not tell him what he had lost. They told him what he might become. A bearer of armor, a keeper of faith, a child of a creed that made the galaxy less bewildering, because it was a promise he could repeat. This is the way. He did not yet understand the weft and weave of that phrase. Not fully. How could he? He was small, and the galaxy was very large. But he understood the warmth of shared meals eaten from metal bowls, the kindness of a gauntleted hand steadying his elbow as he learned to balance the weight of smallest plates, the reverence given to tools that made things whole again. He understood the music of the anvil, soft at first like an old memory, then louder, then a steady rhythm that echoed the breathing of his own body. In that sanctuary of iron, the boy's fear was lifted and set aside like a worn garment. In its place came patience. Sometimes a memory would trouble him, the flavor of smoke on air that had once belonged to fields, the sound of jars nudging each other, the way his mother's fingers had pressed crescents into his shoulder as if to write a protective sigil into his skin. When those moments arrived, he breathed the way he had been taught, counting inward. 1, 2, 3. And letting the forge's glow fill his mind until the edges of the memory softened and lay down like tired dogs by a fire. The armored ones knew, of course they knew, and their silence was never emptiness. It was a garment they wrapped around the boy, letting him grow into it at his own pace. He wore it well. Seasons, if such a word can be given to lives spent beneath rock and among hushed corridors, turned quietly. The boy became taller. His steps made fewer echoes. The smiths let him fetch water, sweep filings from the floor, carry tongs like scepters of an unassuming kingdom. He learned the names of metals as one learns the names of constellations. Beskar foremost, bright in lore, indomitable in purpose. Durasteel, obedient and willing. Alloys that sang differently beneath the hammer. He learned the respectful gestures with which one approached a helm that must not be removed before others, and the way the eye should lower, not as submission, but as acknowledgement that mystery was a shelter, not a prison. And on certain nights, Nights when the galaxy was especially quiet and the forge hummed like a great heart, he would slip to the threshold and gaze into the vault of stars beyond the hidden door. He would find his old village up there, he told himself, not by map or chart, but by a feeling, a gentleness in the pattern of lights that whispered, "You have not been forgotten." He would imagine the fields restored with the patience of time, the ovens relit for bread that would feed other children whose names he did not know. And he would imagine laying his palm against the cool cheek of a helmet and whispering, "This is the way," until the phrase became a lullaby that held even the stars in its sway. Thus the foundling grew beneath the stars, untouched by soft beds or bright festivals, yet richly held by a lineage of steel and vow. He learned to cherish silence, to measure speech, to regard each small task as a thread in a greater tapestry. The name Din Djarin would arrive like a blessing with dawn. An identity set upon him not by blood but by choice, forged and tempered like the plates he would one day wear. He did not yet know the breadth of his path, nor the companions who would join him, nor the child whose eyes would become to him both mirror and horizon. He knew only that a hand had lifted him from the cellar of a lost world and set him in the patient orbit of the creed, and that the stars, in their distant language, seemed satisfied. Rest now in that image, my young one. The boy at the threshold, the forge murmuring behind him, the sky before him, and a promise, quiet, enduring, certain, folded like a letter inside his heart. Chapter 2, The Creed of Silence. Come closer to the glow, my sleepy traveler, and listen to the soft cadence of iron's memory. The years inside the covert were measured not by calendars, but by the rhythm of the forge, by the ring that rose and faded like a chant, by the radiant breath of coals, by the tender patience with which a craftsperson considers a glowing edge and decides whether it is ready to be born into its final shape. Din Djarin learned there, beneath the guidance of the armorer, whose presence was less a person than a weather. Calm, inevitable, shaping. Her voice was a low bell, carried through the cavern by currents of warm air. She spoke little, which is to say she spoke perfectly. Instruction arrived as gestures and pauses, as the subtle tilt of a helm that meant try again, as the lingering placement of her hammer that meant remember what you have already learned. Around her, the covert arranged itself like a constellation of duties. Sentries at the shadowed choke points, cooks drawing ladles through fragrant stews, apprentices filing edges with the restful focus of monks tending gardens. Silence reigned. Not emptiness, but attentive serenity. A lake reflecting every small star. Under this tutelage, Din learned the law that sheltered him. He learned that to keep the helm in place was not to hide, but to stand with the ancestors who had kept it in place under harsher skies. He learned that to reveal the face was an intimacy reserved for warmth of family or solitude's mirror, and that privacy was a hearth no less sacred for being unseen. He learned the line between secrecy and reverence, between fear and discretion. The creed was not a net, it was a bridge, and each step upon it sounded with the same tone. This is the way. Beskar, Beskar, was the armorer's scripture. She taught him to recognize it not only by sheen or weight, but by the way time seemed to gather within it. She described the ore as a stubborn pilgrim, bent but unbroken by the galaxy's great tempests, yearning always to return to its truest form. Together they practiced the art of listening to metal, to hear when it asked for the hammer, and when it begged for the cool embrace of the quench. Din's hands, once the skittish hands of a child, grew steady and sure, the knuckles acquiring the quiet calluses of those who bring form out of flame. In those days, the covert would sometimes relocate as reeds bend with the river's will. Tunnels would lead to caverns, caverns to maintenance shafts, shafts to forgotten basements beneath indifferent cities whose citizens hurried overhead, ignorant of the sanctuary below. Din learned to pack a life swiftly, a bedroll, a bowl, a toolkit, a bundle of clothes that smelled faintly of smoke and oil. He learned to leave no sign behind, save the sense that a place had been well used and well loved. He became a student of unremarkability, taking comfort in corners, in the melody of pipes, in the faithful clank of the door that sealed and unsealed their shelter. Meals were a ceremony of absence. Each took the food and withdrew a short distance to lift the helm in privacy. In this choreography of solitude, Din discovered the dignity of restraint, the way that withholding can nourish as fully as sharing. He ate slowly, listening to the dusk breathing of the covert, the occasional footstep of a sentry, the calm sizzle of stew in its pot. Afterward, the armorer would sometimes tell a story, not with flourish, but in the measured cadence of truth. She would speak of worlds scorched and worlds restored, of the ebb and return of their people, of the many forms of strength, spear, shield, memory. Her voice never rose, it deepened, like a river carving a canyon, so gradually that no one heard the stone yield. Din's training expanded. He learned to move with plates of practice metal strapped to his frame, to find balance where stiffness would first intrude, to pivot and sink and rise with the certainty of a dancer who trusts the floor. He learned the way a blaster's weight extends the arm's intent, and how to let aim be guided by breath rather than thought. He learned that the first act in any struggle is the listening of terrain, the hum of machinery behind a wall, the heat of a pipe beneath the floor, the resonance of footsteps that tell you not only distance but intention. In all of this, the armorer's approval arrived with almost invisible nods. And when she spoke, the words were blessings, cool and sparse. You remember, she might say. And he would feel taller. Sometimes, the young foundling would sit with older warriors whose armor bore the faint scratches of places he had never seen. They would speak of Mandalore, spoken softly, as one speaks of a temple glimpsed through fog. And Din would gather images like seeds. A white city, shining upon a world of green and glass. Domes that held weather at bay. Halls where banners once hung still as prayers. They told of troubled times, yes, but also of meals taken shoulder to shoulder, of festivals that turned war songs into lullabies, of children playing in the reflected light of a sun, softened by canopy and shield. Whether these were memories or legends hardly mattered. They were nourishment, and Din drank them in. There were tests, of course. Not trials of humiliation, but ceremonies of readiness. He would be sent with another foundling to map a series of tunnels and return before the lamps burned low. He would be asked to learn the names of a dozen alloys and present to the armorer a plate that married two of them in a seam so clean it made the eye doubt its own seeing. He would be told to stand guard through the longest watch and recite the tenets of the creed in his breath so quietly that even he could not hear. And yet the body would learn them all the same. When he succeeded, nothing grand occurred. Simply a hand on his shoulder, gauntlet to pauldron, and the murmured acknowledgement that carves a groove in the soul where confidence may flow. At night he dreamed, not of the cellar, no, for that memory had been wrapped and stored with love, but of stars seen through a visor, of wind that moved around a helm and left the face cool and ready. He dreamed of footsteps along a path he could not yet see, and of a smaller set of footsteps beside him, barely more than whispers in dust. And though he did not understand, he woke with tenderness in his chest, as if some distant life had already reached back to touch him. Do you feel your breath, my young one? Deepening, widening, like the mouth of a cave that invites the traveler to rest. The creed is a hush that expands until it becomes a sky. Din Djarin learned to live beneath it, grateful, anchored, serene. He would step into the galaxy as a hunter in time, yes. But whatever coin he accepted, whatever journey he undertook, his true wage would always be the stillness he carried within him, hammered into his bones by discipline and care. And in that stillness, something waited, a place for another to sit, to be fed, to be guarded, to be loved. This is the way. And now, sleep a little deeper, for our road moves from cavern to star lane, from forge to frontier, where the breath of the galaxy grows crisp and thin and full of bright, wandering songs. Chapter 3. The Hunter in the Outer Rim. The covert gave him his shape. The rim gave him his shadows. When Din Djarin stepped from refuge into the wide hush of space, his ship, patched and pious, a little shrine of effort and luck, became the room in which his life unfolded. He was a hunter, yes, but he hunted with the same attentiveness with which he had once swept the forge floor. Each job was a task to be carefully considered. Each landing a prayer that the wind and sand would not enter places they were not welcome. He kept his tools arranged by reach, his rations portioned with quiet thrift, his sleep held lightly, so that he might rise at the smallest stir. In this way, he made of the galaxy a series of small rooms, each with its own door he knew how to open. The guild's tokens, those cool, insistent pucks, arrived like reflections in still water, each bearing a face and a bounty that were, to him, less a person than a path to walk. He did not hate those paths, nor did he love them. He regarded them as weather, sometimes bitter, sometimes lenient, always to be traversed with a hooded calm. On rocky moons, he moved among basalt spires that sounded like bells when the wind threaded them. On swamps, with gnats thick as smoke, he breathed through filters sweetened by a pinch of spice, like a memory of orchards. On snow worlds where light split into 1,000 needles, he stepped carefully, so that the sound of his going would not fracture the silence into shimmering shards. In port towns, he learned to prefer the alleys that smelled of rust and breadcrumb, where cats, thin and utterly sovereign, watched from gutters with eyes like spilled oil. The bartenders knew him by his refusal to be known. They poured without questions, and he lifted his helm in solitude, the fabric at his jaw catching the faint perfume of citrus peel and old wood. When he spoke, it was with the compression of someone who values weight over volume. In this quiet, rumors settled around him like grains in a glass, reliable only when allowed to rest. He did not seek companionship, yet neither did he turn from it when it arrived in forms he could accept. A mechanic with a scarf the color of dusk taught him the virtue of a gentle wrench, and he paid with more than coin. He paid with courtesy, which is a currency that does not diminish. A trader with eyes like rain offered him dried fruit slivered thin and sugared as a child's afternoon. And he paused long enough to let sweetness turn a minute into a jewel. A farmer renting a landing pad asked no questions, and in return received a night of perfect quiet. No lights, no noise, only the low heartbeat of engines cooling to restful silence. In the pursuit of bounties, he encountered those who ran, those who bargained, those who collapsed into relief at the sight of a hand that would take decision from them. He found no pleasure in the capture, only completion. He delivered them as one delivers a package, intact, unbruised by unnecessary handling. And he accepted his share from the guild with the same gravity with which he would receive a bowl of stew. Sustenance, not indulgence. The armor at his shoulders wore the weariness of travel like a patina. It did not complain. Sometimes the night in space grows so large that even a disciplined heart feels small. In such hours, Din would sit within his cockpit, watching stars fold and unfurl around the ship's prow, as if the galaxy itself were breathing. He would let his mind wander back to the covert, to the steady hands of the armorer, to the silent congregation who shared purpose in the dark. He would rest a palm against the metal near his knee, as if to reassure the vessel that it was not merely a machine, but a companion who knew his rhythms. And always, at the edge of that stillness, there hovered a feeling, the sensation that a seat waited to be filled, that his solitude was, in truth, an empty chair, set deliberately at a hearth. You are breathing evenly now, young one. Good. Let your exhale glide like a small ship through a calm corridor of light. For though he did not know it, Din was drawing closer to a world whose sand has learned to sing with the wind, where moisture farms stitched silver lines across the desert like stitches on a well-mended cloak. He was drawing closer to an assignment that was not an assignment at all, but a meeting arranged by the galaxy's old wisdom. A meeting between a man clad in vow and a child clad in silence. The coordinates led him to rough company, clients who wore their elegance like ill-fitting masks, hiding impatience and hunger beneath fine cloth. They spoke in numbers and in terms, like collateral and delivery, as if life were a ledger in which everything could be balanced with a pen. Din listened, accepted, weighed. The puck he received felt no different in his hand than any other, smooth and indifferent, bearing the image of a small prize, stored like a secret in a guarded place. He did not then know what eyes would greet him when that secret door opened. He did not yet suspect that his breath would change its cadence at the sight, as yours has changed now. Softer, deeper, gentler. He landed on a world of cliffs and canyons where dawn combed gold through pale grasses, and shadows cooled the hollows where lizards slept with splayed toes and satisfied hearts. The air smelled of mineral and sun-baked rope. The outpost to which the path drew him was guarded not only by walls and watchers, but by the lazy indifference of those who have never imagined tenderness as a force. Din moved with patience, with courtesy even toward locked gates, as if he could convince their bolts that opening was a form of kindness. He found allies, the sort of allies a disciplined soul often finds by accident, whose programming and goals aligned with the immediate needs of the path. Together they breached barriers, not with rage, but with inexorable application of skill. And then, the door. The small, unassuming door that had waited for the shape of his hand since before he knew his own name. It parted upon a room lit with the dusty calm of late afternoon. And in that room, a cradle, more pod than bed, more seed than crib, rested upon its own quiet gravities. Within lay a being whose ears rose like little sails catching a wind no one else could feel, whose eyes were the pool where night drinks. Ancient and newborn, solemn and mischievous, fragile and stronger than anyone present could know, the child looked up. Din's heart made a motion like a ship checking its course. His companion, bound by straight lines, reached for a swift end. Din raised a hand. The air between intention and act became very clear, very slow, like the space between hammer and anvil where choice is forged. A single pulse crossed that air, a decision that sounded within him like the old forge, like the words, "This is the way," rearranging themselves subtly until they included something he had not previously allowed them to include. He acted not as a hunter, but as a guardian who had suddenly found his watch begun. Thus the hunter's road curved, not by decree, not by philosophy, by the simplest mathematics of the soul. What you protect defines you. The child blinked, calm in the presence of a promise newly spoken. Outside, the wind gathered itself to sing around the cliffs. Inside, Din Djarin felt the galaxy shift and settle and breathe. Chapter 4, The Child in the Cradle. Lower your shoulders, my young one. Let them sink as the cradle sinks, gently, into the cushion of air that bears it. The pod hummed with a small, satisfied sound, drifting at Din Djarin's side, as if it had always kept pace with him, as if his stride had been measured for it from the beginning. He walked not as a rescuer returning from a struggle, but as a father leaving a temple at dusk, careful with the quiet. The child peered from within like a lantern. Not a glaring flame, but a soft core of attention that warmed every surface it touched. The desert watched them go. Lizards kissed the air and closed their eyes like sages approving a lesson. The canyon walls kept their counsel. Above, the sky braided its colors into strands of peach and bronze. And the wind moved as a patient loom weaving the day into the night. Din glanced now and then at the cradle, not out of doubt, but to adjust the angle by which he walked. to place his armored body between the child and any stone that might loosen its grip and tumble. It is a simple thing, protection, and yet it rearranges the map of all other things. Paths that were once straight gain gentle curves. Dangers that were once endured are now declined with a small shake of the head. Meals are planned not for oneself, but to see the child's eyes narrow in contentment. He learned the child's silences before he learned the child's sounds. A wide-eyed silence meant curiosity. A half-lidded one meant the slow drift toward rest. A silence with pursed lips meant a gathering of will that would soon move the world in ways untrained eyes could not track. When such a silence arrived, lights flickered companionably. Tools slid an inch as if in their sleep. A lever released itself with a soft sigh. Din did not fear these murmurings. He regarded them as one regards the weather of a beloved place. Sometimes the breeze lifts the laundry, and you smile and peg it more tightly. Sometimes the cloud gives water right when the field needs it. Sometimes lightning sketches a bright reminder that power is a relative term. The child's gift did not trouble him. It set his steps to a rhythm he found familiar. The rhythm of mystery stewarded by care. On the ship, he rearranged everything. Trays that had held parts were cleared so that snacks could be placed in tidy rows that looked accidental. A blanket, coarse, smelling faintly of old wool and new detergent, was folded 3 times and then a 4th. Because the 4th fold made it somehow more right. The child curled into it as into a story remembered from a previous life. Din's helm tilted in that way it does when private satisfaction rises to the surface and requests a small nod. He gave it. The galaxy, of course, did not share his peace. Contracts do not dissolve simply because a cradle hums. Clients do not bow out merely because a child blinks. But the creed had taught him to place meaning before noise. He cleaned his rifle with the same care as always, but now he set it down with a softness that made the table proud. He planned routes with redundancy, not as a hunter evading pursuit, but as a shepherd seeking gentle grazing and shaded gullies. His ship's old bones took on a new posture, its lights tempering their brightness at night, as if to sing lullabies in their own minor key. The first time the child reached toward him, small fingers extended like delicate roots seeking purchase, Din paused. Armor and infancy regard each other with equal dignity. He did not remove the helm. He did not, as some might, fill the moment with fretful explanations. He offered a gloved thumb, firm and unmysterious, and the child gripped it with miniature ferocity. In that instant, the galaxy clicked into place as simply as a component fits within a well machine. Housing. He understood not with words, but with posture. His shoulder lowered. His stance widened as if to say, "Here I am. I will hold the world so you may sleep." Sleep came easily to the child and more carefully to the man. He took the watches, and the ship's window framed 1,000 mild lanterns hung in the black. He breathed with them, in and out, in and out. Sometimes the child stirred and made a sound like a pebble rolling in a stream. Sometimes the child laughed at nothing any instrument could measure. Din learned to laugh too. though his laughter was stillness that grew warm at the center. He learned that a held silence can be laughter's cradle. When difficulties approached, he met them with his usual economy. Only now economy included mercy as a calculated value. He persuaded rather than pressed. He paid rather than proved. He lingered to repair a farmer's fence rather than press on to cut an hour from the journey. And he discovered a truth that the covert had taught him in another form. When you dignify the small, the great often arranges itself around you like planets obedient to gravity. Traders offered him the last of a good harvest at a price that embarrassed them. Dockhands guarded his ramp without being asked. An old woman pressed a bead into his palm, a night blue stone with a lighter blue eye, saying only, "For safe travels." And he tucked it into a pocket where it made a companionable weight. There were moments of strain, yes. Moments when those who considered themselves owed would attempt to collect. Moments when metal spoke sharply against metal, and the air took on the bright, thin edge of attention. But even at the lip of such precipices, Din's voice lowered rather than rose. "No," he would say. The words stretched like a silk cord across the chasm. Not the child. And the universe, which listens closely to any statement made without urgency or apology, often found a way to soften. A tool jammed at the right instant. A light failed over a villain's eyes. A wind gusted into a well-timed curtain. The child's gaze might rest upon a device that had sworn to behave badly, and it would reconsider. Between stops, Din told the child stories without names. He spoke of deserts that keep secrets for those who walk gently, of cities that hum to themselves, of rains that arrive like late guests who have been forgiven. He spoke of a creed that saved a boy by wrapping silence around him like a mantle, and of an anvil whose song could smooth a frightened heart. He did not say I or me, because the child did not need a history book. The child needed a pillow made of words. And when the child's eyelids drooped, he let the words lengthen into soft threads. This is the way. This is the way. Until the phrase ceased to instruct and became purely to soothe. You are resting well now, aren't you? Your breath tidy. Your thoughts folded like the blanket in the cradle. Know this. A bond formed not at the speed of fire, but at the pace of water finding its level. A man who had been the sum of his vows discovered that vows are spacious enough for love. A child who had known much movement learned the constancy of a particular footfall, a particular gloved hand, a particular helm that bent at just the right angle. Their orbit became shared, and in that gravity there was neither fear nor famine. There was simply a path that would take them through many places. And in each, they would repeat the ritual of arrival. Protect, provide, rest. The galaxy turned, the cradle hummed. The hunter's heart, no longer merely a tool of pursuit, became a hearth. And if at times The old ache returned to Din like a distant echo, the memory of a cellar, the weight of a mother's hand. He found that the presence of the child did not sharpen it. It gentled it, made it a lesson rather than a wound. He could look at the echo and nod, and the echo would nod back. And both would go on, companionably, toward morning. Thus ends our first quiet movement, my patient listener. In the next, the creed will meet the wider currents of the galaxy's ancient currents. And the child's gift will brush against old traditions and older longings. But for now, close your eyes to the soft hum of the cradle and let the stars dim themselves around you, as if drawing a curtain for your rest. Chapter 5. The Guild's Shadow. The galaxy is a place of ledgers. To some it is not stars and winds, not deserts or oceans, but numbers in long, unending columns. Credits earned, debts owed, contracts kept or contracts broken. And in such a world, my young one, a man who defies the ledger invites the shadow of reckoning to fall upon him. Din Djarin, once a trusted blade of the Bounty Hunters Guild, found himself now written into those columns not as a hunter but as quarry. The shadow followed him, long and deliberate, and it fell upon every step he took with the child. At first, the change was subtle. Din felt it in the air more than he saw it. Bartenders who once poured his drink without hesitation now glanced toward hidden corners before filling the glass. Dock workers lingered too long beside his ship, hands too clean to be mechanics. He noticed tracking fobs that blinked at his passing, small red eyes that pulsed with hunger. And in the murmuring corners of cantinas, he heard his name spoken, not as reputation, but as opportunity. He had betrayed no contract outright, not in his own eyes. He had simply chosen a higher contract, one unrecorded by the Guild's ledgers, one older and deeper. The contract of the creed, the vow to the foundling. Yet the Guild, jealous of its order, would not see it so. To them, he had turned against the current that carried them all, and in doing so, had made himself an island. And islands, my young one, attract storms. The first hunter came quietly, in the form of an old acquaintance. Din had known him in years past. A thin man with armor pieced together from the scraps of half-forgotten wars. He approached Din on a dusty thoroughfare, the kind where traders haggled beneath awnings, and the smell of roasting tubers lingered in the air. His voice was casual, his manner unthreatening. But Din saw it, the telltale bulge of a blaster beneath his cloak, the faint glow of a fob hidden in his palm. The fight that followed was quick and silent, hidden by the noise of the market. When the man fell, stunned and breathing shallowly in the dust, Din dragged him into the shadows. He did not kill him. He left him alive, knowing full well that mercy would not halt the Guild's pursuit, but unable to betray the silent dignity that had shaped him. After that, the shadow deepened. 2 hunters ambushed him in the shell of a ruined starship, the hull still scarred from some ancient battle. Their blasters rang in the emptiness, echoes tumbling through corridors lined with dangling wires. Din fought with patience, using corners and silence as his allies. The child's pod hovered faithfully at his side, drifting just behind his shoulder, humming softly as though unconcerned. When the hunters lay bound in the dark, Din's breath slowed, and for a long moment he simply listened to the distant creak of the ship's metal bones, reminding himself that stillness is its own weapon. The guild was not blind to these failures. They pressed harder. Soon, whole squads bore down on him, their armor polished, their movements coordinated. He felt the pressure tightening around him like a vice, felt the air grow heavier with the weight of pursuit. Wherever he landed, eyes found him. Whatever door he entered, whispers slipped in after him. He was no longer moving unseen through the galaxy. He was a figure under siege, a solitary tower beset by waves. Yet he was not without kin. One evening, in a city of spires, where the guild's net had drawn so close he could almost hear it tightening, salvation came not from chance, but from family. From shadowed alleys and forgotten doorways, Mandalorians emerged. Their beskar gleamed like constellations suddenly revealed. Jetpacks roared, filling the sky with trails of fire. Blasters sang in harmony, a chorus of crimson light against the night. For a brief, fierce hour, the hunters of the guild found themselves pressed not as predators but as prey. Din did not join the battle fully. He did not linger to strike or to savor. His task was clear: protect the child. He carried Grogu through the chaos, shielding the pod with his own body as blaster fire sparked against his armor. Once, only once, he looked back. And what he saw carved itself into his soul as deeply as the creed itself. His brothers and sisters standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, their visors reflecting firelight, their voices silent, but their actions speaking louder than any vow. They fought not for coin, not for glory, but for him, for the child, for the way. The cost was heavy. The covert was revealed. Their secrecy, their shield against the galaxy's noise, was torn open. Din knew what it meant. They would scatter again, vanish into deeper tunnels, darker refuges. Some might fall. Some might never be seen again. But their sacrifice was freely given. And that knowledge burned within him like the forge's fire. When at last he reached safety, when the child's pod rested once more beside him in the hold of his ship, Din sat in silence. The hum of the engines was steady. The stars drifted beyond the viewport, and Grogu cooed softly in his sleep. Din placed his gauntleted hands upon his knees and bowed his head. He did not pray, not in words, but he remembered. He remembered the tilt of a visor in the forge, the weight of a hand upon his shoulder, the quiet solidarity of those who shared his vow. And he understood something he had never seen so clearly before. The creed was not only secrecy. It was not only the refusal to remove the helm, nor the silence of meals taken in solitude. The creed was this: kinship. The refusal to let the small be taken by the great. The choice to stand together, even when all the galaxy turned its guns upon you. It was, in its truest form, love. Hidden beneath steel, perhaps, but no less real. He lifted his head at last, his voice low, steady, meant for no ears but his own. This is the way. And in his cradle, the child stirred, as if he had heard. Chapter 6. The child's gift. There are moments, my young one, when the galaxy does not merely happen to us, but pauses, breathes, and reveals itself in a single act so mysterious that the heart never again returns to its earlier shape. Such a moment came when Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, discovered the power slumbering within the child, his Grogu. Their journey had brought them to a world of green fields and narrow streams, a place of farmers whose lives were measured in crops and weather, in planting and harvest. Their homes were modest huts of timber and clay, shaded by long roofs of woven reeds. By day, children ran among the fields, laughing as they chased small amphibians that darted from puddle to puddle. By night, lanterns glowed softly along the walkways, turning the village into a scatter of tiny stars upon the earth. It was a world of peace. But peace, my young one, is a fragile garment, always at risk of being torn. The villagers' voices trembled as they told Din of their plight. A creature haunted their fields, massive, horned, a reptilian titan whose tread churned the earth and whose breath rose in clouds of steam. It struck without warning, trampling crops, destroying pens, leaving behind ruin and fear. Their weapons were no match for its armored hide. They offered Din what little they had: baskets of dried fish, jars of fermented grain, homespun cloth. Their eyes pleaded more strongly than their words. Din considered. He could have refused. He owed them nothing. His path was already burdened with pursuit from the guild, his every step shadowed by hunters. Yet, when he looked down and saw Grogu staring up at the villagers with wide, curious eyes, something within him shifted. He remembered the creed, remembered the vow that no foundling is left alone, no innocent left unprotected. These villagers, though not Mandalorian, were foundlings of a different kind, defenseless, small before the galaxy's vast cruelties. This is the way, he murmured to himself, and so he accepted. He spent the next day preparing. He studied the tracks the beast left behind, gouges in the earth as deep as troughs, claw marks along the bark of trees, crushed reeds where it had passed. He mapped the patterns of its attacks, the rhythm of its hunger. He worked with the villagers to dig pits, to strengthen barriers. And all the while, Grogu hovered at his side, sometimes giggling at the frogs that leapt from the ditches, sometimes tugging at his cloak, sometimes staring into the distance with that same solemn gaze that seemed far too old for his small frame. When the evening came, the village was tense. Mothers gathered children into huts. Men and women stood ready with spears and nets, though their hands shook. Din positioned himself at the edge of the fields, his rifle steady, his armor gleaming faintly beneath the moonlight. The air grew still, heavy with expectation. Even the insects hushed, as if they too awaited the monster. Then it came. The ground trembled first, a low thunder rolling beneath the soil. Then, from the shadows of the trees, the beast emerged. Its scales glimmered like tarnished bronze. Its horns curved wickedly. Its eyes burned with primal hunger. It bellowed, and the sound cracked the night like a storm breaking stone. Villagers shrank back in fear, but Din stood firm. He raised his blaster, fired. Bright bolts seared across the field, striking the beast's hide. Yet the creature barely slowed. It charged, tearing through fences, scattering debris, shaking the earth with its colossal stride. Din fought with every weapon at his disposal. He launched grapples, fired pulse after pulse, set off charges in its path. The beast staggered, roared, but pressed on, driven by fury. Din felt the ground tilt beneath him, felt the sheer weight of the battle pressing him backward. For a moment, doubt flickered across his disciplined heart. And then, Grogu raised his hand. The child, so small in his hovering cradle, so fragile in his tiny frame, lifted one arm into the air. His eyes widened, glowing faintly in the starlight. His ears tilted forward, his whole body taut with concentration. And in that instant, the world changed. The beast slowed. Its massive limbs dragged against the soil. The roar caught in its throat, turning into a strangled bellow. Dust hung motionless in the air, each particle frozen like an insect in amber. The villagers gasped, their voices hushed, their fear transmuted into awe. The air itself thickened, as if unseen hands pressed upon every surface, commanding stillness. Din turned his gaze from the beast to the child. What he saw pierced him deeper than any blade. Grogu's face was strained, his brow furrowed, his tiny mouth set in determination. His whole being radiated with an ancient strength, invisible yet undeniable. Din felt it, like a tide pressing gently but inexorably against his chest. He understood, in a way deeper than words, that this was no accident. This was the legacy of the Jedi, the old order whose very name had once been spoken with awe and fear. The beast wavered, groaned, and with a final shudder, collapsed to the ground. The earth shook as it struck, sending ripples through the soil. It lay still, its chest rising and falling slowly, subdued, not by blaster fire, but by will. Grogu's hand dropped. His eyelids fluttered. His body sagged, overcome with exhaustion. He slumped into the cradle, fast asleep, his small chest heaving with deep breaths. Din rushed to his side, heart pounding, arms ready to gather him up should he fall. The villagers erupted in cheers. They rushed forward, voices raised in gratitude, praising the Mandalorian, praising the miracle. Some called Din savior, some called him hero, yet Din did not hear them. His eyes were fixed upon Grogu, upon the tiny form sleeping so peacefully after a feat so immense. That night, the village feasted in celebration. Fires crackled, drums beat, laughter rose like smoke into the stars. Din sat apart, his helm lowered, the child asleep in his arms. He listened to the villagers sing, but his mind wandered to the ancient tales of Jedi knights. He remembered the armorers' stories, the warnings of their power, the memories of wars between Mandalore and Jedi blades. And yet, how could such a history matter now, when the Jedi's legacy lived within a child whose trust was absolute, whose innocence was unblemished? History whispered of rivalry. Love whispered of duty. And Din, as always, chose duty. But now duty and love were one. He would protect Grogu not only from the Guild, not only from the galaxy's cruelties, but even from the weight of his own gift. He would shield him until he could walk his own path, whether that path led to Jedi, or to Mandalore, or to some new place neither yet understood. As the fires burned low and the villagers drifted into sleep, Din bent his head close to the child. His voice was soft, almost a breath, meant only for Grogu's dreaming ears. This is the way. And somewhere in his sleep, the child cooed, as though answering. Chapter 7, Echoes of Mandalore. The galaxy, my young one, is filled with ruins. Some ruins are built of stone, worn by wind and rain. Others are built of silence. Legacies forgotten, promises broken, names spoken only in hushed tones. For Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, both kinds of ruin followed him. He carried them in the weight of his armor, in the spaces between his words, and in the silent cradle that drifted always at his side. Mandalore. The name itself was a ruin. Once it had meant splendor. Domed cities rising from emerald plains, banners of clan and creed unfurled in the wind. Warriors gathered in halls of song and steel. Once its people had looked to the stars with defiance, their armor gleaming like constellations given flesh. But then came the purge. Then came fire. Then came silence. And now, the very word, Mandalore, carried more questions than answers, more grief than pride. Din did not often speak of Mandalore. The creed had taught him to live in the present moment, to let the forge of duty shape each day. Yet even silence carries echoes. And those echoes began to find him as he traveled with the child. On a barren moon scarred by war, he encountered the first. A warrior, clad in battered armor, sat by the wreck of a starship that had long ago fallen into disuse. His plates were painted in the faded hues of a once proud clan sigil, though the colors had chipped until they resembled only bruises. The man's voice was low, rasped by years of bitterness. He spoke of Mandalore's fall as though it had happened only yesterday. They burned our cities, he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. They melted our Beskar into ingots for their vaults. They scattered us like dust. And still they hunt us. Always they hunt us. You wear the creed like a shield. I wear it like chains. Din listened. He did not interrupt, did not offer comfort. He understood that some griefs cannot be soothed, only witnessed. When at last the man fell silent, Din placed a hand upon his shoulder, gauntlet upon pauldron, and said only, "This is the way." The man gave no answer. Perhaps he no longer believed. But Din carried his sorrow with him, as one carries a stone in a pocket, a reminder of what once was, and what might never be again. On another world, Din encountered a different echo. This one spoke not with grief, but with fire. She was a woman whose armor gleamed clean, whose movements carried the confidence of command. She removed her helm freely, speaking with her eyes unshrouded, her face revealed. To Din this was startling, almost heretical. Yet she bore herself with such conviction that her words rang like truth. "You hide," she told him, her gaze steady. "You cling to silence as though secrecy were strength. But strength is not hiding. Strength is standing in the light. Mandalore can rise again, not as whispers in caves, but as banners raised high. We must reclaim our world. We must make our name resound across the galaxy once more." Din's silence deepened. He did not argue, for the creed had taught him that silence is often wiser than contradiction. Yet her words lodged within him like splinters. Could it be true? Was his way merely one branch of a greater tree, one interpretation among many? Could Mandalorians live openly, proudly, faces revealed to the sun? Grogu, listening from his cradle, blinked up at her with innocent curiosity. The woman smiled, reaching out as though to touch him. Din's hand moved instinctively to block her, not harshly, but firmly. The bond between him and the child was not a banner, not a cause. It was something quieter, more sacred. She seemed to understand, and withdrew her hand with a nod. Their parting was courteous, yet Din carried her words with him long after. At night, in the stillness of his ship, he would hear them again, mingling with the rasp of the bitter man's grief. Mandalore was both ruin and dream, both ash and spark. Which was true? Could both be? Sometimes, when Grogu dozed in his lap, Din would trace patterns in the stars and imagine what Mandalore might be if it were rebuilt. Not the Mandalore of domes and wars, but a gentler Mandalore. A place where children laughed without fear, where foundlings were not hidden in cellars but lifted into the sunlight. He did not know if such a Mandalore could ever exist, but the image comforted him. The galaxy continued to press its questions upon him. Traders spoke of Beskar relics scavenged from old battlefields, sold to the highest bidder. Refugees whispered of clans that refused to acknowledge each other, each clinging to its own vision of truth. Some called for war, others for peace, still others for silence. Din listened to all, and in his heart he felt the echoes collide. Yet amid those echoes, one sound rang clear, the gentle coo of the child, the tiny fingers that grasped his thumb, the trusting eyes that looked upon him not as a Mandalorian, not as a warrior, not as a remnant of ruins, but simply as father. And so he understood. Mandalore, whatever it was, whatever it might become, mattered less than the vow he had made. The creed was not in banners, nor in helmets, nor even in Beskar. The creed was in the act of protection, in the refusal to abandon, in the love that hides itself in duty. One evening, as they camped beside a quiet river whose surface reflected the stars like a mirror, Din watched Grogu chase fireflies. The child laughed, a sound brighter than any song of Mandalore he had ever heard. Din knelt, placed his gauntlet upon the earth, and bowed his head. "This is the way," he whispered. And this time the words were not about Mandalore. They were about Grogu. Perhaps that too was Mandalore, reborn, not in cities of stone, but in the bond between father and son. Chapter 8. The Armorer's Counsel. The forge, my young one, is more than fire and hammer. It is memory. It is prophecy. It is the place where the past is reshaped and the future is given form. For Din Djarin, weary from the long shadow of the guild and burdened by the questions of Mandalore's future, there was only one place to turn. Back to the covert. Back to the armorer. Back to the fire that had tempered him since he was a boy. The journey itself was quiet. He moved cautiously, for the guild's eyes were everywhere, and the covert had paid a great price for aiding him. Entire families of his people had scattered into tunnels, into warrens, into half-forgotten chambers beneath the cities of others. Some had perished. Some had vanished so completely they became only rumors whispered in the steam. Of cantinas, But the creed endured. The way endured. And so, through hidden passages and coded signals etched on walls, Din found his way again to the place of sparks and silence. The forge glowed as he entered, steady, eternal, as if no battle, no loss, no purge could extinguish it. Sparks drifted upward, caught in the draught of hot air that rose into the shadows above. The sound of hammer against metal rang out in measured rhythm, each strike a heartbeat for those who still clung to the way. The smell of heated ore filled the air, sharp, metallic, strangely comforting. And at the center of it all stood the armorer. She did not look up as Din approached. Her focus was upon the work before her. A plate of beskar glowing red upon the anvil. She struck it once, twice, 3 times. And only then did she pause, her helm tilting slightly to acknowledge his presence. No words of greeting were needed. Silence itself was greeting enough. Din placed before her not only beskar earned in his travels, but also the cradle. Grogu, gazing up at the vaulted ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. The child cooed, the sound soft, inquisitive, like the voice of a river flowing in a hidden cave. The armorer turned her helm toward him. She said nothing for a long moment, but the tilt of her visor carried weight enough to fill the chamber. At last she spoke, her voice low, even, resonant with authority that was neither forced nor questioned. This child, he is not of our kind. Yet he is in your care. You are his father. This you have chosen. This you cannot set aside. Din bowed his head. Though the words were no surprise, their weight still settled upon him like a mantle. Father. Not guardian. Not protector. Father. The word rang within him, reshaping his very sense of self. The armorer continued, I have seen his gift. It is of the ancient enemy, the Jedi. Long ago, Mandalore fought them across battlefields that spanned worlds. Their power is great. They move the unseen, bend it to their will. Many of our people fell to their blades, and yet they are not without honor. Her hammer tapped lightly against the cooling beskar, punctuating her words. It is not our way to abandon the foundling. The creed is clear. A child in our care is our responsibility until he comes of age, or is reunited with his own kind. Din looked up, helm glinting in the forge's glow. The words struck him like the ringing of the hammer, reunited with his own kind. He understood the implication. The child was not meant to stay with him forever. One day he would need to seek out the Jedi, those mystics of legend, so that Grogu might be raised in the fullness of his power. Yet the thought tightened his chest. The idea of parting with Grogu, of seeing the cradle drift away into another's care, seemed unendurable. Still, Din did not argue. He had been shaped by vows, and vows were not meant to be comfortable. They were meant to be true. The armorer set aside her tools and approached. She placed a hand upon the child's cradle, gauntlet clicking softly against the metal. Grogu blinked up at her, unafraid. Until then, she said, he is clan of 2. You and he, father and son. This is the way. The chamber grew still. Even the embers seemed to hush. as though the galaxy itself bowed in acknowledgement of the words. Clan of two. A new house, small but unbreakable. Forged not by blood, but by choice. Din felt his heart swell within the confines of his armor. All the questions, all the doubts about Mandalore's future, about the Creed's many interpretations, about whether secrecy or banners or silence was the true path, all of it receded for a moment. What mattered was this. He and Grogu were bound, not by convenience, but by vow. The Creed had spoken, and it had sanctified the bond that love had already forged. The armorer returned to her anvil, her voice steady as the hammer once more found its rhythm. You will seek the Jedi. You will deliver the child to them, that he may learn the ways of his people. This is not failure. This is not abandonment. This is protection. To guide him toward his true path is the highest form of care. Din absorbed her words as one absorbs heat from a fire, letting them warm him even as they burned. He nodded, slowly, the gesture carrying both obedience and sorrow. He did not speak his fear, but he felt it. Felt the weight of time pressing forward. Felt the shadow of parting looming, even as the present moment glowed with togetherness. Grogu yawned, stretching tiny arms toward the sparks that floated upward. Din watched, and for a fleeting instant, he imagined a different future. Grogu grown, armored, a Mandalorian foundling raised fully in the way, not as Jedi, but as son of Mandalore. He pictured teaching him the Creed, showing him how to wield the hammer, how to move silently, how to stand firm against the storm. That dream was sweet and fleeting. The armorer's words had made clear that the child's destiny lay elsewhere. Still, destinies are not always what they seem. And the galaxy has a way of weaving paths together in ways no vow can fully predict. At last, the armorer spoke her final words. The benediction that closed every council. The vow that outlasted grief, doubt, and fear alike. This is the way. Din bowed deeply, his voice low, steady, meant for the child more than for the forge. This is the way. He lifted the cradle once more, feeling the small weight within, and turned toward the shadows of the tunnel. The forge's glow followed him for a time, then faded, leaving only memory. Yet that memory burned brightly enough to guide him through the dark. Clan of two, father and son. This was the way. Through Chapter 9, The Beacon in the Forest. My young one, breathe slowly and let the forest gather around you. Moss underfoot, wind like a patient hymn. The path of Din Djarin, father of the foundling, curved toward a quiet world where trees rose like pillars in a cathedral of green. Here the sky broke into gentle pieces between the boughs, and light fell as if sifted by time itself. Streams threaded the undergrowth with silver lines, and far above, birds traced thoughts upon the air. This was not a world of markets or guns. It was a place where old things listened. He had come following whispers, the way a pilgrim follows the scent of incense toward a hidden shrine. Traders had spoken of an ancient order who once moved the unseen, of wanderers who, while few, still tended embers of a nearly extinguished flame. The armorer's counsel rested in his bones. Seek his kind. Guide what you protect. And so Din walked beneath the leaves while the cradle hummed softly at his side. Grogu gazing into every pocket of shadow as though each were a friend. The forest opened at last upon ruins. Not the sharp ruins of war, but the softened ruins of memory. Stones laid by hands long returned to dust. A ring of pillars leaning toward one another as if to share an old secret. In the circle's heart stood a plinth, low and wide, its surface smooth with the polish of seasons. Carvings ran along its edge, not words, not images, but something in between. Curves like the wind's handwriting, lines that suggested pathways invisible but sure. Din approached as one approaches a sleeping animal, calm, slow, certain. He lifted the child and set him upon the stone. "Here," he said, voice low within the helm. "If there is a way for your kind to hear you, let them hear." Grogu sat, small and alert, ears tilted like little sails. For a time, nothing happened. The wind moved through leaves with a sound like old paper turned by careful fingers. Din stood guard, rifle cradled, scanning the trees, counting his breaths. Then Grogu's eyes softened, as if a thought had taken his hand. A faint shimmer gathered around him. It was not light, not exactly, rather the idea of light. The air thickened, the stone warmed, and the ring of pillars seemed to lean closer. Din felt it on his skin, a pressure like a gentle palm, steady and protective. He did not interfere. To guard sometimes means to stand very still. Time, in such places, forgets itself. Minutes stretched like dusk, the forest growing quieter as even the smallest creature recognized a ceremony. Din listened to distant water and to nearer silence. He listened to the memory of the forge. He listened to the unspoken thread between himself and the child. If they come, he thought, let them come with open hands. Someone came. Not with trumpets, not with fire, but with the unassuming gravity of water finding a riverbed. A figure stepped from the trees. A wanderer cloaked in pale cloth. Blades at her hips, asleep in their housings. Eyes bright with a patience sharpened by many winters. She did not rush toward the child. She stood at the ring's edge, head inclined, as one bows before an altar that is also a mirror. "You have brought him far," she said, voice a quiet instrument tuned for truth. "And he has brought you further still." Din neither agreed nor disagreed. Agreement was already written in his posture. "He is of your kind," he said. "At least of your order's stories." The wanderer's gaze rested upon Grogu with an affection that contained sorrow. "He remembers more than he can speak," she murmured. "Names and rooms. The edge of a song the galaxy no longer sings. He remembers fear, too. But he remembers comfort most of all." Her eyes lifted toward Din. "You." Grogu blinked at her, curious, and reached a small hand toward air that held no hand to grasp. The shimmer pulsed once, then steadied. The wanderer stepped nearer, but not onto the stone. "This place is a door," she said, "not a destination." "He calls, and others may answer. Perhaps not I. Perhaps another whose life moves now toward this circle without yet knowing. The forest accepted her words with a rustle like satisfied breathing. Din's grip on the rifle loosened. "What must I do?" he asked. "Guard him while he calls. Let nothing break his seeing. The galaxy will test your patience with sudden noise." A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth, not unkind. "It always does," he nodded. They stood in shared hush, two guardians of different vows, while the child sat with eyes half closed and mind open as the sky. The air grew denser. The plinth glowed a little, like hearthstone in late evening. Somewhere far away, a thing that had been sleeping woke and turned its face toward this forest. Trouble arrived as she had promised. A tremor in the underbrush, a low whine gathering toward a shriek, the sound of engines descending through branches. Din shifted a fraction, his body a wall placed gently between metal and child. Dark shapes resolved through gaps in the canopy. Hired soldiers in lacquered carapace, helmets reflecting a mean geometry. A ship's belly opening like the maw of a patient beast. The Wanderer's blades woke white. Din's rifle spoke in red. Leaves spun like confetti cut from night. Yet the clearing's heart remained calm. For Grogu sat within his shimmering shell, the plinth holding him as the forge holds fire. Bolts aimed inward bent like reeds in a current, finding bark instead of breath. The soldiers faltered. The galaxy dislikes wasting effort, and in that hesitation, the Guardian's efficiency became mercy. Bodies fell without cruelty. Engines screamed away, deciding to be elsewhere. The forest resealed itself. The shimmer around Grogu thinned and went out, with the satisfaction of a candle pinched gently between wet fingertips. He yawned, all ceremony gone in, the perfectly ordinary way of the very young. Din scooped him up. The child's small hands clutched at the join of pauldron and cloak. The Wanderer sheathed her light. "He called," she said, and the call went far. You may not see the answer today, but it travels. Her gaze lingered on Din's helm. When the path asks more of you than you think you can give, you will give it anyway. Because you already have. He inclined his head. Will you take him? The question tasted of iron. "Not I," she answered gently. "I walk another road." But a teacher moves toward him even now. Your task remains unchanged. Protect him until teacher and student meet. She regarded Grogu, and for an instant Din saw in her face the image of a child she had once been, or a child she had once lost. "Name him," she said softly. "Names hold. Names heal." Din looked down, as if the answer were written upon the curve of those wide ears. The Wanderer saved him the search. "Grogu," she said, tasting the syllables like a blessing. That is the name that clung to him when all else fell away. The name entered the forest and made itself at home. Din repeated it, the helm's vocoder softening the edges. Grogu. The child turned at once, eyes bright, as though he had been waiting to hear himself spoken by the voice he trusted most. "This is the way," Din murmured. The Wanderer nodded. A mirror reflecting a mirror, they parted without ceremony. She vanished into green shadow. He carried the child from the ring of stones, back beneath the branches where light fell in patient coins. Above them, the sky widened. Somewhere beyond it, a teacher turned his course. And if the forest kept a little of their quiet, if the plinth retained a whisper of warmth, if the pillars leaned forever so slightly inward as if in expectation, well, the galaxy is a place of such small, holy leftovers. They are how it remembers what to do when called upon again. Chapter 10. The Stone That Calls. Let your breath lengthen, my young one. Let each inhale lift like a hill, each exhale roll down its far side. For our father and his foundling soon came to a mountain crowned with ancient stone, a place where the wind speaks first, last, and in between. If the forest was a door, this was a bell. When struck correctly, the sound it sent through the galaxy could be heard by those who listened with their whole being. They climbed at dawn, Din's boots biting into the grit. Grogu nestled close within his hovering cradle, peering over the rim at lizards that posed like philosophers upon warm rocks. The path coiled upward in patient loops, and as they ascended, clouds drifted beneath them like a slow river. At the summit lay the stone, broad, round, worn to a smoothness that felt not empty, but prepared. The carvings along its edge were echoes of those in the forest. The same gentle script of a language that tells you more by how it curves than by what it says. Din set Grogu at the center and stepped back, rifle across his chest. Posture a quiet fortress. If there is a teacher for you, he said, let this place show the way. Grogu placed his tiny palms upon the stone. Nothing, and then everything. A column of pale energy rose like breath in winter, visible only because the morning light loved it. The child sat within it as within a shaft of sun. Eyes half-lidded, his mind wandering roads the body could not walk. Wind braided itself around the column and grew calm, as if reassured by the purpose of this brightness. At first the mountains seemed content to let them be. Then the galaxy remembered its sport. From the horizon, trouble drew near. A sleek ship sliding through air with the confidence of a knife drawn slowly from a sheath. It circled once, twice appraising, then opened its belly to loose men who admired their own cruelty. Dark armor gleamed, nets and binders hung ready. Their leader's voice arrived before his boots, amplified and oily. Hand over the asset. Din did not answer. Answers would have been interruptions, and the child had work to do. He placed himself between the wind and the boy, and spoke in the only language such men understood. Economy of motion. Blaster fire stitched the air. Din's shots were punctuation, full stops precisely placed. Some of the enemy fell. Others learned the wisdom of cover. Still the leader advanced, patient, unblinking, the way a storm advances after it has decided to love a coastline. Din tried to lift Grogu from the stone. The column rejected him with a warm firmness, as a mother might when a well-meaning hand reaches for her sleeping child. He staggered back, understanding. Let the bell ring. The mountain was now their ally as long as the song continued. Reinforcements darkened the sky. Jets screamed. Smoke curled around the rim of the stone. Din moved even more quietly inside himself. Calm becomes armor when metal grows thin. He used the terrain like a second weapon. Ridges for vanishings, outcrops for angles, gravel for sound. He fought to the rhythm of his breathing and to the counter-rhythm of Grogu's serenity. A lullaby and a drum. Help arrived. Not loudly, but decisively. An ally of Beskar and Scars, another who wore history on his shoulders, brought fire to the mountain's edge. His aim, the kind craftsmen have. Exact, tender, final. Side by side, they turned the tide from certainty to question, from question to retreat. The leader withdrew, promising return with the confidence of men who have never met a promise they kept. At the summit's heart, the column dimmed, the stone cooled. The bell had been struck, and the note had gone out into the wide dark. Grogu collapsed into gentle sleep, not troubled, simply emptied of light, the way a lamp is once its oil is spent. Din gathered him. The ally nodded once, like a nail driven home, and the mountain watched them descend. Days later, the answer came. Night had wrapped their ship. Stars had hung like patient fruit. From that orchard, a presence entered. A figure robed in quiet, moving with the confidence of someone who has practiced humility until it became strength. A blade of lime fire could have announced him. Instead, he let the whisper of doors and the soft tread of boots carry his introduction. He stood before Din and the child, and in his gaze there was neither demand nor apology, only invitation. I will teach him, he said, voice young and old at once, if he chooses to be taught. He knelt so his eyes were level with Grogu's. Do you wish to learn? Grogu looked from the teacher to Din, from Din to the teacher. Choice, my young one, can weigh more than armor. The child's ears dipped. His eyes shone. He lifted his arms not toward the robed figure, but toward the Mandalorian he called father without words. Din's breath paused. The teacher, who understood many kinds of love, smiled as one smiles at sunrise, even when one had planned for rain. Then let us give him what both roads can offer, he said gently. Time, a little training, a little distance, a door that is open both ways. Din nodded, though inside him the sea rose. He is clan of two, he said. Whatever he learns, he remains my son. The teacher bowed. Then he will learn steadfastness before skill. That is the better order. He extended his hands, and Grogu, after one more look at the visor that had become home, allowed himself to be lifted. No drama, only gravity obeyed. The ship's corridor narrowed as they walked. Lights glowed like tame stars. At a threshold, the teacher paused. Some farewells are blessings disguised as wounds, he murmured. Not as comfort, but as truth. We will return him when the lesson is ready to be held. Din stood very still. The teacher moved away, the child looking back over a small shoulder. And though the helm did not change, something within it did. A decision old as love waited just ahead. Chapter 11. The Long Goodbye. Now, my young one, let your eyes grow heavy, for what follows is tender. The path that courage cuts often looks like a letting go. Training began in a place arranged for clarity. Stone floors, quiet air, windows that framed branches and sky. The teacher guided with a touch like wind. He did not press, he invited. Grogu lifted stones as if they were bubbles in a stream. He balanced upon logs as if he had been born in trees. He closed his eyes and listened to the world's slow breathing until his own breath matched. Laughter visited often. So did naps. Learning, when it is true, accommodates small yawns. Din visited when asked and waited when asked. He kept the ship clean with the reverence of a guest preparing an inn for a returning traveler. At night, he sat in the cockpit, helmet catching starlight, hands resting upon his knees like calm animals. He remembered the armorer's words, "Protection is also guidance. Guidance sometimes requires distance, measured in heartbeats, stretched like bridges. But the heart, my young one, is not a bridge. It is a room that refuses to forget the shape of those it has held." Each lesson Grogu learned left joy in Din, and also left an outline where a small weight had rested. He practiced a new discipline, to rejoice without clutching. One evening, a summons. The teacher met him at the threshold of the training hall, robe lit by late sun. "He is ready for what only you can give," the teacher said. "Not power, permission." Din entered. Grogu stood in the center of the room, robe a little crooked, ears a little more certain, eyes enormous with both pride and worry. The world hushed. Even dust hovered politely. The teacher withdrew, leaving them with space and time enough to alter both. Din approached slowly. He wished to kneel, but found that kneeling was unnecessary. Love had already placed him lower than himself. "Grogu," he said, and the name was a cradle. "You are strong. You are kind. You know when to hold and when to release." He paused, air gathered. "You know who you are." He lifted both hands to his helm. The creed, strict and saving, stood beside him like an elder relative whose rules had preserved a family through bitter winters. He honored that relative, and then he honored his son. The locks released with soft clicks that sounded like yes. Metal rose. Air kissed skin long kept private. The face revealed was not a revelation to Din. It was simply his. But to Grogu, it was treasure suddenly found in a familiar house. The child reached up with both hands and touched the cheek he had always known by pressure and never by sight. Din closed his eyes, not to hide tears, but to offer a safe surface upon which they might fall. "This," he whispered, "is me. And this is you." They stood like that for a long time. No music, no speech, only the sound of two beings recognizing the obvious miracle of one another. When at last Grogu lowered his hands, there was no panic in him, No anxiety at the thought of leaving for a little while longer to learn what he must. There was simply trust. The teacher returned, keeping respectful distance from the holiness of what had just transpired. He inclined his head. Now he can learn without wondering if he is lost. Din replaced the helm, not as a retreat, but as a return to a vow that had made this tenderness possible. He knelt to Grogu's height. "Go with him," he said. "Return when your heart tells you to. The door is open, both ways." Grogu chirped, a sound like a bell very far away, yet perfectly clear. He climbed into the teacher's arms of his own will. The teacher looked to Din, not for permission, but for blessing. Din gave it with a nod. The corridor that had narrowed before now seemed wide enough for any future. The goodbye was not an ending. It was a shape the love took in order to keep growing. Chapter 12, Clan of Two, again. Sleep deeper now, child of the quiet hours, for endings and beginnings are often the same garment turned inside out. Din Djarin returned to the pathways of his life. The repairs, the contracts chosen with care, the meals eaten with simple gratitude, the inspections of gear done like prayers. The seat beside the cockpit remained empty, and yet not empty. He placed a small knob there, salvaged from an old lever, polished until it remembered laughter. He worked with steadier mercy than before. He refused more jobs than he accepted. He repaired a stranger's transmitter because the man's hands shook with a sickness that was nobody's fault. He stood watch for a widow while she slept her first untroubled sleep in months. He delivered a package of medicine without charging extra for the distance. None of these acts were dramatic. All of them were true. In this way, Mandalore rose a little each day, not as a planet, but as a practice. At night, the ship's hum was a lullaby that sometimes hurt. Din learned to let the hurt be, the way one allows a stubborn river to keep its course, rather than attempting to push it uphill. He visited the forest and the mountain in memory, feeling their patience cover him like a blanket. He whispered the creed with a new cadence, not as protection against fear, but as permission for love to keep its shape without apology. And then, as naturally as dawn follows an honest night, footsteps returned to the threshold he had kept swept. The teacher arrived. Or perhaps only the breeze arrived first and brought the teacher with it. With him came a smaller step, a familiar weight in the air, a particular pattern of breathing that had once set the tempo of Din's days. The door opened. The child stood there, no longer someone who might learn, but someone who had learned to choose. He had chosen. Grogu crossed the floor without hurry. He carried no drama, only himself. Din's helm tilted, and the whole galaxy tilted with it. No words for a time, only hands meeting hands. A cradle's lid, opening of its own will, as if remembering its favorite occupant. A small knob being pressed into a small palm, as if a circle had drawn itself and decided to be complete again. The teacher smiled the way trees smile when wind tells them something they already know. He will always hear the bell, he said, meaning the stone and the path of power. But his first music is yours, and you will keep hearing it even when the road bends. He bowed, a gesture with no debt inside it, and left them to their ordinary holiness. Clan of two. The words were not just spoken again, they were embodied. Din adjusted the ship's seat without thinking, the way he had done 100 times. Grogu climbed where he had climbed before. The stars outside looked exactly as they had looked the night before, and entirely new. The ship rose. The galaxy welcomed them not with fanfare, but with roots that opened like hands. There would be struggles. Always there are struggles. Times when food was scarce and sleep scarcer. When the guild's shadow remembered its shape. When old arguments about Mandalore woke to make their claims. There would be questions about faces and banners, about secrecy and light. But none of those questions were louder than the fact of a child leaning against a man's armor and finding it comfortable. This is the way, Din said, and the phrase was not an oath only. It was a lullaby for two. Grogu answered in his own language, half coo, half sigh. And the ship, clever thing, adjusted its hum to that pitch, as if to sing along. Close your eyes, my young one. Picture the cockpit, the glow of instruments like polite stars, the curve of the viewport framing an endless night that is never empty. The shape of a helm, angled as if listening to a story it has heard before and would like to hear again. And a small shape beside it, warm, content, certain. The galaxy is vast, yes, but within it there is a hearth, fired by vow and kept by hands that know the worth of quiet. Rest there. Let the road go on without you for a while. Father and son will keep watch. When you wake, they will still be traveling, and the path will still be gentle beneath their feet, because they have chosen to make it so. This is the way.